And he said, have you ever heard of Feng Shui? And I was like, what's that? And basically what I could glean then and what I started exploring is, how is it that we orient ourselves within an environment so that our energy, our sense of self, and our experience is maximized?
Hi, and welcome to And If Love Remains. I'm your host, Mike Levitt, and I have on the line two great guests and two good friends of the show. Again, Elias Axel Pedersen will be joining us today. And we also have with us Mark Ainley. And I'm normally, when we have Mark on specifically, he's with the Piano Files, and we get to talk about really cool stuff like old piano recordings and amazing artists and cool stuff. But we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk, I think we're going to talk a little bit about maybe design and philosophy. And Mark, why don't you kind of let us know, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about Feng Shui, and I think demystifying a little bit the preconceptions that people have about Feng Shui. And, I think a lot of people just think it's just a way of doing Asian decor, and it's supposed to bring good luck and all of that. And I think it's actually an incredibly deep and insightful way to view not just where you live, but really all of reality, and how it is we engage with the environment, how the environment impacts us, and that dance between the inside and the outside. So I think it's very cool stuff. So there's lots of music in there as well, so it ties in with harmony and balance and all of that. And I think it should be, I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation, as we always have.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, like, especially I think since the pandemic that has gone on, and people spend a lot more time inside. They've noticed their spaces much more. They've, maybe engaged more even with outside things. I think this is a really important subject. How do we engage with the environment around us? And the only knowledge I have about Feng Shui, and I appreciate you pronouncing that properly for us, but, as I mentioned before, like maybe some jokes from, some stand-up comedian or something like that. But it's such an interesting topic. First of all, let's talk about your relationship with Feng Shui. How did it come into your life? And talk a little bit about that.
So I think, like many of the things that were very meaningful to us, it came unexpectedly. I had just moved to London in 1996 after 3.5 years in Japan, and I was going there. I was interested in music and the music industry, as you know, and I moved to London, and I moved in with a friend of a friend. I had somewhere to stay for a few weeks, and then, through my social network, I, found a place to live. And we were talking about my experience living in Japan for the previous few years. And, I think a Westerner moving to a place where the whole structure of the language is so completely different, and how things are done is so different, it really opens up your mindset. I mean, you can resist that, of course, and a lot of people do. And you could just decide to see whatever's different is wrong, which, again, a lot of people do. And that can be, I think, actually a major topic for what we can discuss today. But for me, learning the language and learning how, everything I've learned is just learned and not necessarily true. I got really interested in, the whole mindset and the way of life and so on, not just in Japan, but, the Asian philosophy in general. And I got introduced through a friend in Japan to the Tao, to the Tao Te Ching, this sort of ancient philosophical text that's quite poetic and very deep. And it's got, very deep concepts, very simply expressed and quite minimal with its word choice, but it really hits to the core. And I was talking about this with my new roommate, and he said, have you ever heard of Feng Shui? And I was like, what's that? Because I hadn't. And he said, hang on a second, and, ran up the steps, came down from his bedroom, and he had a book on it and handed it to me. And I flipped through, and I was immediately hooked. And basically what I could glean then and what I started exploring is, how is it that we orient ourselves within an environment so that our energy, our sense of self, and our experience is maximized. So there I was, like, interested in, like, how is it that you orient yourself in your space, and how can, like, is there some kind of patterning or program to how physical space gets aligned in a way that's balanced? Like, my first alternative healing technique that I came across is one that you guys have discussed on this program before, Alexander technique.
Right. Yeah.
Which was one of my deep loves. Absolutely love it. It was thoroughly eye-opening to me when I got into that at the age of 16, when I first found out about it and started, getting sessions in Montreal when I was 19, and as it turns out, with the same person who Elias had been working with. So it was kind of mind-blowing. And I really actually thought that I might become a facilitator, but I ended up working into something, moving into something similar but different. But there's this whole other way. We've learned one thing, and there's actually another way that we can be balanced that's more intrinsic. And I think a lot of our deepest learning comes from unlearning what we've learned and what's covering up the essential, and stripping away the inessential so that you're left with the essential. And that was some of what struck me with Chinese philosophy, but also with what I was reading about with Feng Shui. Now, there is definitely the way that you can look at Feng Shui as an external only thing, like you put this here and that's supposed to do this, and you put that there and that's supposed to do that. And there's a truth and a lie to that. It's a bit reductionist to see it in the standard Western Cartesian way. But if you look at, there is actually no difference between the inside and the outside. We see physical world as external from our frame of reference, and we see our thoughts and experiences as internal because, we're inside our body and that stuff's not visible. So we think that's what's inside and physical world is outside. But if those were all actually just on one continuum, then there is actually no separation between that. And, if anything, that COVID should have taught us, and really still could teach us, is look how communicable everything is. Because basically, the air molecules spread around. I mean, they spread around the world. This thing spread around the world, and that's what energy is like. That's what physiologically and subatomic, like all the atoms moving around, all the molecules moving around, everything is constantly moving. And if you want to just bring things down to a very simple level, if you mop your floors, the air at eye level looks cleaner. And why shouldn't it? Because the air in the room is the air in the room, and that touches the floor, right? So there is no real separation. And I think one of the issues we've got in the Western mindset is that we see everything external that we're not physically attached to as separate from us. So Alan Watts, my favorite Zen philosopher, who I also first came across when I was living in Japan, he talked about how, we think that our world ends at our fingertips. And so, when you let go of something, it's no longer your problem, which is why it's very easy to litter and pollute. It's not my problem, right? But you wouldn't do that, in your bedroom or your living room, except for the fact that actually some people do, right? But, some people, if you would, not to offend anyone's finer sensibilities, but, people might feel comfortable spitting on the sidewalk, but you wouldn't do that in your living room. So it's okay outside, but it's not inside. But why is there any difference? And why is littering somehow okay? Like it's all part of the same ecosystem. And I think that, again, COVID could have, and maybe still has the potential to teach us the fact that, yes, everything is connected. What one person does affects everybody. What, air moves around, oxygen moves around, everything moves around. And again, an example, which, not the most pleasant one, but it's kind of clear, if somebody decides to, I'm not going to go to the bathroom. I'm at the swimming pool. So, have a little wee in the pool. There's no part of the pool that's not affected.
Yeah.
There's no peeing section of the pool. Once something's in there, it's all in there. And that's what it's like with energy. So if you want to just think, then just translate that into your home. If you have stuff in your home that you don't like, if you have clutter in your home, if you have stuff that when you look at it, you have a negative association with it, how can it not be affecting you?
Well, absolutely. I think, and there's, you see a realization of that. Even I think in Western minds, that's something that I think resonates. Let me put it that way. I mean, we even go so far as having a famous psychologist who Jordan Peterson, who, love him, hate him, doesn't matter. He encourages people to pick up their room. And why? Because it'll make you better. And you think, well, why would picking up your room make you better?
There's a level of responsibility, and responsibility has become a bit of a dirty word in our culture.
Right.
And there's some weight and so on to it. But there's another way of looking at that as well, which is how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yes.
And if you're not going to do it at home, then can you really be expected to do it elsewhere? And the fact is, actually, it's true. Some people do things differently out in the outside world than they do at home. But actually, it's a source of stress for that to happen.
Well, because it's not authentic.
Exactly. It might be well-intentioned. And people, I think, to be honest, I mean, really, I think everybody is doing their best with the information that they have available within the construct of their belief system. Everybody's doing their best. Not a popular idea when it comes to some people, but in fact, it's if you take into account somebody's belief system, then yes, they are. And the skills that they actually really do have available that they can apply. So when it comes to, tidy up your room, clean up your room, people don't want to hear that as well, because it reminds them of their parents telling them to do something they'd rather not do. And this nature of, adulting, which has become a term now, right? I'm done with adulting for today. I have to wash the dishes. That level of responsibility. When people look back and they say, life was so much better when, it's really easy to get into that mode. But the reason life was better then isn't because, TV was better then, because, really it wasn't, or that, food was better then. Well, not really. I mean, the number of additives and all of that stuff and lack of controls was pretty awful back in the past too. What was really great was the fact that you weren't paying rent and working and you didn't have these responsibilities. Life was a lot better when your parents were paying for everything and you had more time to do what you wanted. And, the weight of responsibilities can be a pressure where sometimes people decide, I don't want to take care of things at home because it reminds me too much of, that pressure when I was a kid and I'm already doing so much and I'm tired from work. And, there's a level of really justifiability and reality to it, right? People, life can be challenging and it's tiring.
I think that a lot of, kids, of course, they want to grow up and say, I can't wait till I'm an adult and I can do anything I want. I have all the freedoms in the world. And adults want to be kids because they don't have any of the responsibilities. And there are plenty of adults who want all those freedoms, quote unquote, freedoms without the responsibilities and don't understand what that entails. And something else you talked about brought up a little bit of Jonathan Haidt. He has these moral matrices he talks about. And different cultures will see certain things as either gross or not gross, or acceptable or unacceptable. You mentioned spitting. Typically here we're not a culture that, or at least the way I was raised, we don't spit anywhere in public or in private. But if you go to China, for instance, it's fairly common for people just to spit on the street, and it's not that those people are gross. That's just the culture. You go to Singapore, and you're not even allowed to, put gum on, you just can't chew gum in public, and you can't wear, it's so controlled, but they might not see it as that. It's also one of the cleanest countries you'll ever see. So there's a trade-off.
There's a trade-off for there's a cost for everything.
Yeah.
And there's reality is reality, whether you like it or not, and whether you believe it or not. So, gravity works, calories in, calories out. Like there's all of this stuff that happens, right? So, if you drop something, it will fall down. Like these things happen. You don't have to believe that will happen for it to happen.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to feng shui, and I've seen this quote going around about science. This is given some of the, the topics that are in the news now.
Yeah.
Science is true whether you believe it or not.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it is the same for feng shui, because actually, these principles work whether you believe them or not. And there is a lot that's expressed in feng shui which has been not through the lens of feng shui, which has been through environmental psychology and biophilia, which are two forms of design that use science-backed data for the impact of the built environment on the human being. And the principles totally align with feng shui.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is, in my estimation, absolutely scientific backing for a lot of feng shui principles and the general concept, because there wouldn't be the field of environmental psychology, which, you can go to study at university as a scientific discipline. That wouldn't exist. And that's the overall philosophy of feng shui. And I think there are certain elements of feng shui which, there is not the scientific research on it. And I personally would welcome it.
Yeah.
I also think that unfortunately though, the whole process of science, of how science justifies things and studies things, can be so reductionist that it can actually leave out some of the things that create what it is that happens in experience. Because and this is where I call feng shui an art/science, because there is both. Because how we react is very individual. So how one person's going to react to exactly the same thing in the same environment is going to be different. And so this is where it can be hard to pin things down, but there are a number of very broad principles which absolutely do apply and are very powerful, that are part of feng shui. And a lot of those have been validated from everything that I have read about biophilia and environmental psychology. Every time I come across stuff, I was like, yeah, that's totally something that I would be presenting to my clients or students.
Yeah. I wonder too, if it's, science is always learning. And I think people don't necessarily understand the scientific method, or the fact that we have a certain amount of understanding and facts now, but those could change, and it might not change a fundamental core principle, but it could change a little bit of the outside of it. And that doesn't mean it was wrong before. It just means it's sort of growing. And I don't know if it can necessarily pinpoint or judge or measure art in a way, and maybe that's a good thing.
Well, I have a theory that art is a fractal. Like what makes art, and one of the things that makes art is that art is a fractal. In other words, it works all the way up and all the way down.
Yes.
So when you call feng shui an art, I really appreciate that. As an example, I mean, like I said, I know nothing about it, so I'm excited to hear about some of these principles and such. But I'm right now in the process of reorganizing my studio. I just pulled out 2 big armoires, and my wife and I, cleaned a bunch of stuff out, and like literally, it's almost like I can breathe. I'm like, wait, I had no idea that I wasn't breathing in here. I had no idea that I wasn't thinking in here. That somehow the clutter that was surrounding me was somehow cluttering my mind. And so they call design and feng shui and art, it's a fractal nature that works all the way up and all the way down.
That's it. I mean, everything, like I was saying before, right? Everything is connected, and you might not see the threads of connectivity, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And often it is that, we become so familiar to things that it's only the familiarity that makes them comfortable. Or we tolerate things and we tune them out. And then when we tune out the discomfort, we tune out other things. And so go back to Alexander technique, right? Slouching feels comfortable when you're out of alignment. And when you start doing the right thing and having that natural, innate upright posture, the muscles that haven't been used can feel uncomfortable, and it can take a while to readjust. And then actually you feel this alignment, and you can imagine doing the previously wrong thing. And so similarly, like you remove the clutter of the muscular tension of the slouching, so to speak, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can sit upright and I can actually be myself, and I can express with greater ease, and because there's less interference. I consider clutter is like, and James Clear in his wonderful book Atomic Habits speaks about friction in the environment. or that basically we have, when our environment isn't supporting what we want to do, we say there's like friction. And I consider clutter to be a form of friction in the environment. Now, you don't want everything to be too super smooth. Otherwise, it's like if you're driving on ice, well, you need to hit the brakes, and then what happens?
Right.
So we need to have, yes, there's a certain degree of friction that we need. But, and we tend to live life in straight lines, and our architecture is built on straight lines, but life doesn't flow in straight lines. And this is where you bring up the fractal that actually really ties that in. That, there is a meandering, evolving pattern to how things flow that doesn't always match the linear clinical element to how the human mind can work in that reductionist thing. And that's unfortunately where I think sometimes science has gone off. How did, penicillin got created because there wasn't a sterile laboratory.
Yeah.
So if we're doing things in too sterile an environment where actually this is not how life works. So it can help on some level, but a lot of discoveries happen by accident. And the way you're going to figure things out sometimes is not always going to be in a linear way. But so how do we adapt when we're moving in a linear fashion, and then all of a sudden we get a curveball? How do we adapt? And that's when you look at a meandering river in the environment, the reason it got its shape is because it was flowing in a straight line. It came across some land that it couldn't push through.
And it went around.
And the water was working with its operating principle of keep flowing, when there's some propulsion. So it has this gentle persistence, and it keeps going, and it continues, and it finds that what's the path of least resistance, because I can't get past this. And so it adapts. And so there's a book also that's called The Obstacle is the Way. And if you consider that as a philosophy, but if it's phenomenal. And if you look at a river, you can see the reality that obstacle created the form of the river. So it literally is the way of the river. The whole river path was formed by obstacles.
It's the Tao.
It is. And it's also, though, when I use the word obstacle, there's an issue there, because that's the dualistic perspective. For the river, it's actually not really the obstacle. It's the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not a problem. But in our culture, right, anything that is unexpected, it's become worse and worse in recent years. Anything that's unexpected, that we don't want, that we don't anticipate, is seen as a problem.
It's a negative quality associated with
And
it.
yeah. And then how we try to get through it is by continuing the straight line.
That's so brilliant.
And we try to break through that obstacle, as opposed to, well, wait, how about meeting this obstacle and doing an assessment with where I'm at, which is what the water does. It doesn't avoid the shoreline. It actually meets what becomes the shoreline and says, okay, I'm going to keep going. Let's go to the left over here, see what happens.
Well, because again, and this is really part of our Western mindset, we're able to create things through through force. We hammer stuff together, we cut things, and it works. We use our technology to kind of force nature bend nature to our will in a way. We build dams, and and I'm not saying that those things are wrong. Like I'm a huge Western, I'm a big fan of technology.
Absolutely. Me too.
However, there is a mindset of I'm gonna. I have a buddy who used to laugh at me because I would have a tendency. I was so persistent on stuff that I'd have a tendency to go through a wall when the door was right next to me. I just couldn't see that it was there.
Yeah, and and there's something to that, and sometimes that's needed. But I think the lack of meeting what's there and connecting to the bigger picture, which then enables you to realize, this so-called obstacle, this rerouting opportunity, is actually helping me perhaps avoid something that's further on in the landscape that I might not be aware would actually be more of a problem if I barreled through this than if I moved to the side. Yeah. And so, this is the challenge. When you're in the present moment, you don't see the big picture necessarily, right? From that perspective. And so when you're same when you're driving down the road, right? I mean, you go around the corner, you don't know what's around the corner, but actually that's what's engaging.
Right.
It keeps you in the present moment, and it helps you engage with the environment, enjoy the scenery. That being in the present moment, because you don't know what's coming, that's what the experience of life is really about.
Yeah.
And if you think about the most memorable, enjoyable experiences you've had, generally it's been what's been unexpected, unplanned, unanticipated. It was a surprise. It was, there's any number of things. It was something that was new to you. So you hadn't tasted that kind of food before. You hadn't expected to come across that restaurant, and you decided to try it out. And nowadays it's very different, because we're going to read the reviews on Yelp. We're going to go use Google Maps. We're taking everything according, so there's no adventure. And I'll go further in this whole concept, and then maybe we'll come back to sort of how feng shui actually applies to your home. But this is all philosophical, but it all ties in. Movie trailers. This is one of the things that's been honking me off for 10 or 20 years, where they show you the microcosm of the whole movie with plot twists, major plot twist devices, and they're showing you that. So then, why do you want to go see the movie? There's going to be no surprises.
Yeah.
And I think this has trained the public, and in a sense, stopped people from developing their capacity to be able to tolerate surprise and be well with surprise. I think it's one factor, one feature. It's not, that's not obviously consciously intended on the part of Hollywood. Let's control people, let's limit people's ability to adapt. But I think it actually has that effect. And the irony I find with that is, do you all know remember what the biggest grossing movie of all time was?
Titanic's up there.
It's up there, but it's not.
Star Wars is probably up there.
No, it's Avatar.
Avatar. I was going to say that's
right.
That's a next.
And in Avatar, specifically, the trailer showed you none of the story, and you didn't even see what they looked like.
And yet, I have to say, it was a bit formula. It was still Hollywoodish, and I think what you're getting to is the formulas. I think things.
What I'm getting to, though, is this is the trailer, though, not the movie.
Oh,
right,
yeah,
so the people weren't
just the trailer. So the people were like, "Wow, what is this going to be?"
Oh, and you're so right. And people are craving that. And one of the ways that we know people are craving that excitement, that adventure, if you look at television today, the number one ad placements for television are all sporting events. And the reason why is because it's the only type of entertainment today that we have no expectation. We have no idea what's actually going to happen.
Can't be scripted.
We have to see it in the moment. And so we have to watch the commercial to see the next quarter.
And what if that is the reason why? I mean, it could be that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's a whole other thing with tribalism and togetherness and all of that, where it doesn't have to be dual and it can actually be great, as opposed to militaristic in the sense of, us against them, and just actually really enjoying the inherent nature, some of the higher qualities of competition and sort of furthering and bettering and, doing your best and all of that. But, that whole, you don't know what's coming. It's the same thing with gambling. Yeah. That's why people gamble, because it puts you in the present moment. You're taking a risk and you don't know what's happening, and the roulette table and slowing down. And you're in the moment, and we spend so little time in the moment in general because it's same old.
There are many.
Every day's the same. You drive to work the same way. You sit at the same desk. Everything looks the same. Everything tastes the same. I'm going to have the same coffee. All of that sort of stuff, which is why, this is why, the pumpkin spice latte, all of a sudden it's like, woohoo, here's something that I know, but it's not every day. And so, you can have something that's different. It's new, it's seasonal, even if you know it. But this is why people want new taste sensations and all of these kinds of things. But you can do this in your home.
Right. So I was going to say, apply this to feng shui, because we're talking about two almost competing ideas in a way.
Yes.
We're talking about flow, going with the flow, creating an environment that works with the energy, that works with your goals. But at the same time, we have this aspect of, the yin and yang. We have this one aspect of excitement and the undiscovered country that needs to be part of that same environment.
Yes.
How do we put that together?
How do we do that? I mean, the main thing is, I think a lot of people think that feng shui is going to be, it's a one time, you put everything in its right place, and then it's great forever and ever, and that's it. And you never move it.
You mean it's not?
Yeah, sorry. Newsflash. Just like, plants, flowers, flowers rot and you throw them out and you get new flowers. plants grow and they die, and, things evolve, and you have to open the window and get fresh air in your home. And you do need to update things occasionally, because your nervous system does need a new hit. And I'm not speaking here just about, mindless commercial consumerism and, just buy new everything all the time to change things up. But there needs to be ways where you have, what are the signposts, what are the landmarks, and then what are the things that are changing within that environment, so that you have both the sense of stability that a home needs to provide, because it's there to make, where you can feel safe and secure and be protected from the elements, again, which has an ironic ring to it when you talk about, feng shui and the 5 elements of nature. But, it's nice. It's raining here in Vancouver now. It's nice to be indoors and to be warm, and it's, and all of that. So that's great. So you have that level of protection, but you also need that, where is it not going to feel static and stuck and nothing changes, and then I feel stuck. So it's that, when you look at the yin yang symbol, and, warning, you'll have to rein me in a little bit here, because I can talk about yin yang just forever, because it's pretty amazing. But, you have the, the 2 sides of that, and the line that connects it down the middle is that meandering line, which is the same form as the meandering river that I was telling you about.
That's correct. Yeah.
And that is that dancing line between the line that, is between those opposites. And it's a little bit like, if you imagine something that kind of looks like the yin yang, when you have a little bit of a dabble of balsamic vinegar inside the olive oil, in the little dish at the restaurant that you're going to dip your bread in, if you're gluten-free or not. And, what's that connecting line between where the olive oil, where it doesn't blend with the balsamic? There's that magical line that's just there, where they're in touch, but they're not, it's that magical space. And that meandering line is really what it's about. So we live in a polarized world of opposites, and there is a harmonious way for those to interact.
Yeah.
And I think if we look at yin yang, this is one of the most important concepts of anything, and it relates to everything that's going on in our culture now, and to what we can do in the home as well. Do you know which one's the dark side and which one's the light side? Do you know?
Oh, I always forget. I did know this at one point, but
I don't. I'm just no.
So the yin is dark. Yang is the lighter one, and my question was flawed. So your answer is only going to be as good as the question that you ask, because there is no dark side, and there's no light side.
Okay.
There's the darker side and the lighter side, because the one that's black has the seed of the white, right? There's that little white circle that's in it.
Okay. I was gonna say, is that like Plato's triangle? But no, you're talking about something different. Okay,
right. Gotcha. And then you know the form we're talking about, right? With that sort of, it looks like those 2 sort of like almost like seals or something.
Right, but you're not saying it's not the white side, because there's no such thing as white. You're saying
it's actually not completely white, and the black side is not completely black, because it's got a white dot in it, and those grow into the other. It's constantly moving and changing. So there is no such thing as complete darkness or complete light. And if you spend time in nature, you go out at night, and when there's no city lights, your eyes adapt. So it's never black. It's always just darker.
Yeah.
And then there's lighter. So it's all relative. And the fact that, we're trying to live in a culture where, things are stated as absolutes, and those absolutes don't really exist quite in the same way in nature.
We're more comfortable with binaries, is or is not, on or off, right or wrong. Yes or no. It
helps us to function to a certain degree. And there is, within a framework, that does work and that does exist. Like, if the computer is on, it is on. And if it is off, it is off. That's true. Actually.
Except for it's keeping time magically when it's off.
Right. Which is kind of neat, right? So there is stuff that's still going on, and the data is still there, even if you can't access it. That's kind of cool. Yeah. So there's all kinds of different ways of, you can sort of expand outwards a little bit. So, within a certain frame of reference, yes, the duality exists within the duality. Outside of that duality, no, there's actually more. And in reality, there is more between the duality. But just as a matter of speaking, that our culture sees, dark side, light side, and they'd say, not quite as absolute as we would think. And that meandering line, and what helps you navigate between that perceived duality and expressed duality that we have so much in our culture, is that fluidity, that flexibility of not going linear. And in a sense, every curved line, there's straight portions to it, and then it curves, and then the curving is that adaptability. And what we've seen in this pandemic is that people who adapt have managed, and people who haven't have struggled more. And adaptability is not, unfortunately, a skill that we are well taught. None of this stuff is stuff that we're taught. We should be taught philosophy. I think we should be taught how to clean our rooms and how to take care of our spaces. We should be taught to create spaces that are meaningful to us, which I think is where we can start to go now with this conversation and what this is all about. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't. You go into these long trains of thoughts. I don't want to interrupt, but I have so many questions that come up. Please. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you talk about the curve, the linear versus the curved line, and also that we're not taught to think in these ways. I think music, bringing it back to that, since we've had you for so many musical podcasts, it's so important because it makes you think in a non-linear fashion, and it's not this is the right way or this is the wrong way. This is a way, and this is a better way, and this is based on some fact or some knowledge how you can improve it. But I had one question early on, which you were talking about how Western thought and maybe Eastern thought. I was just thinking of Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am," and that there's no sort of external and internal. Everything is just an internal. Do you think there's a correlation between, or some bridge that can be, or gap that can be bridged between, Feng Shui or Confucianism or whatnot, and like Descartesian, or not? I don't know if that's.
It will depend. I'll try, and we'll see if I'm actually getting to your question, to the heart of your question or not. One thing I'll point out, though, if we go just to jump back to the musical thing, there is no right and wrong, but unfortunately, musical culture has tried to create a right and wrong out of it, right? Where the lines, like the right note, the wrong notes are wrong, versus, well, musically, what's being expressed, and is it really a wrong note? Or, the bar lines really mean something, as opposed to, well, what's the phrase that extends beyond the bar lines? What about the rubato, which can't be expressed linearly in the text? And how do we do that? So there are, unfortunately, the notation is literally on the page, black and white, and yet we're creating color. And
the notation is limited.
The notation does have straight lines, but we're creating something beyond that.
I think,
but we've gotten into, to go back to Cortot and that Bach recording that we played last time. I mean, the rubato, and good luck playing rubato like that in the conservatory today, because it's seen as, quote unquote, wrong, for Bach. And yet, are we really sure about that? So this starts to be the challenge. And I think that then music gives us the great example of, well, actually, no, the right and wrong doesn't work with it. And then when we start looking at, at design and Feng Shui has, in effect, in sense, it has been applied in a right, wrong way. And this is the issue with it, that it's been applied popularly and by some proponents of it in a way that I think is inaccurate and not to the heart of the teachings. And that is a more Confucian way, where it is, this is the right way, this is the correct way of the human mind, and this is the reason, and this is what we see. Whereas, with nature, well, no, actually nature just does what it does, and it doesn't interfere, and there's control from within. But the control and chaos are really, there you have those two sides of yin and yang, and they're harmoniously blended. And how do you balance that, right? And this is like where, Feng Shui is actually not about minimalism, and it's not just about everything is perfectly lined up and, Cartesian sort of linear sense. Because again, you don't see straight lines in nature unless they are aggressive.
But that's when I hear Feng Shui, or if I imagine it in my mind, that is kind of what I think of as a minimalist, like very stark. Maybe the dusk is in a strange area or something, But that's kind of what I imagine.
Yeah, and the challenge comes in a few ways. It's where a lot of folks who have applied it, to the letter of the traditional text, without adapting to contemporary architecture, they can, again, the literalism can miss some of the point and miss the natural expression. And again, we see the same thing in music, right? Where those who stick to, so-called authenticity isn't necessarily authentic, because, right now we're not living in China 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago.
Right.
We have Wi-Fi and electricity and indoor plumbing and, all these great windows and, these kinds of materials and all of this sort of stuff, which, you change one factor in an equation, the entire equation has changed. Mm-hmm. That happens in math, right? You change one number, one factor in an algebraic equation, the whole equation is different. And so we need to look at what are the bigger, broader principles, and how is it that we apply this then in the reality that we're in the 21st century, you're in wherever, whatever country you are, with whatever design sense, or with whatever person you're with who has their own aesthetic and their own likes and wants and needs, and how do you apply that in that sense? So this is kind of the challenge. And I also think Descartes, I think he was limited in, I think, therefore I am, as opposed to I be, therefore I am, or I cognize, therefore I am, because I think that thinking is not the only aspect of consciousness, because there's also feeling, there's thinking, and there's being. So I would say that's sort of, thinking is mental, the feeling is emotional, the being, you could say spiritual, because there's just the isness of it. And so all of that inner world is beyond thinking. Right. And so I think he was articulating it to the capacity that he could as a highly intellectual being. And, there is that. But I think it's also limited, so you can think a certain thing about your home and what you like, but how you feel about it might be different. And how you then be in that space and how you are impacted by it might be different. And so you might think, for example, I'll just try to make up a feng shui concept here. You might think that, okay, I have Aunt Gladys's tea set over there and I need to keep that because Aunt Gladys might come for a visit and she'd be upset if I didn't have it out.
Okay.
But how you feel when you see it is, God, actually, I really don't like Aunt Gladys. And it kind of triggers you and you don't like it. And so your state of being then, what that starts reflecting to you is that you're willing to do what you don't want for others, which can be a selfless thing, but it can also be where you let other people determine what's going on for you and you're not upfront about what your own needs and wants and such.
Mark, you are hitting on something that's, I think, really, really important. And that's like the objects that we have around us are really symbols.
Yes.
And, I think about this
beyond what we can imagine.
Right. I think about this with my students. I'll ask them occasionally, especially if I've known they haven't practiced well for a few weeks or something. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, so tell me, when you see the piano as you're walking by, how do you feel? What do you think? Mm. And, oftentimes they're like, not great, or I feel bad, or I feel guilty. So, maybe they don't use those words, but that's kind of the general gist that they get. And you have to talk them through the idea that, you can't get rid of, feng shui. You're not going to get rid of the piano necessarily.
Yeah.
But if you can organize your time in such a way so that when you see the piano, you either think, I've already practiced, I have a time to practice, or now is the time to practice. Then all of a sudden, all the guilt, all the angst, everything else melts away because it's already there. So it's done.
And it's not about the thing; it's about the relationship with the thing.
Exactly.
So that's about your inner
of the yeah.
Well, and that symbol can change. What it reflects and what it means can absolutely change. And this is where I think, again, what minimalism and feng shui do have in common is a clarifying of the relationship. When you're a minimalist, you've stripped away extraneous things, and things you've recognized that you don't need or you don't value. And you can do that by an external metric of having less, or you can do it through a metric of, and this is where I do love Marie Kondo, not necessarily how her particular aesthetic per se, but the principle that everything around you should spark joy is utterly brilliant, because it's about clarifying the relationship. And what she has people do of touching your objects. That's the water that's meeting the land and the obstacle. Touch it, meet it, decide, do you keep it or you don't? And if you're saying goodbye, thank it. There's a real, you're having a relationship with it, where if you treated it as a person, would you just, boot it to the curb, or you say, thank you for your time, thank you for this, thank you for all of your help, there's a level of politeness where you start recognizing the things around you are not just things, but they are also opportunities for you to practice your state of being and your relationship with everything in your life.
I think some cultures, I mean, at least in Jewish culture, I know in Christian culture as well, you and in Islam as well, we're all similar in this regard that we say prayers for food that we eat, and in different ways of thanking them. And I always feel a little bit odd saying those necessarily in English, but there are some of the Hebrew ones that I'll say. But just the idea that we're already a couple of steps removed. We don't catch our food anymore. We don't grow our food. We go to the supermarket and it's there for us, prepared by any number of people or a line that's come before it. Truckers that have brought it to us, from far away places. And so just understanding whether or not you think an eternal being or not, but just acknowledging that this came to me by the work and the help of many others, people or non-people, the animals that were essentially sacrificed, and just being aware and thankful of that kind of thing. It's an object, but it becomes us, in a way. So we're really
and it changes your relationship with that food.
Yeah,
as Mark was talking about.
Yeah. That's it. And so, in a sense, also what you start doing with Feng Shui, and this is one of the other levels, and it's not talked about quite as much, though a bit, is your kitchen also relates to your relationship with nourishment. Your dining area reflects your relationship with nourishment. So, how do you prepare nourishment? How do you assimilate nourishment? And so then that's not just about the physical, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. How am I nourished? And so if the environment is dirty, it's cluttered, you can't find what you want, or you can't, or it's not comfortable, or any of those things, this is the way the mind and your consciousness does work. It takes, what's happening on the physical has reverberations that go out to the emotional, mental, and spiritual.
Yeah. So I have a question about the clutter thing, because, I'm sure everybody that has a partner comes into contention or disagreement with how clean or cluttered or whatnot things should be. Yeah. And I'm sure you've both seen those TV shows like the Clutter Wars or something, and where they go to this professor's house who has just books and books. You can't walk anywhere. It's somehow
a couple effect.
Yeah, and somehow they're comfortable. They know where every piece of paper is. Yep. And I wonder, are they actually comfortable? That maybe they are.
This is, can I jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I always get so excited with all these great questions and topics. So comfort is familiar. Yeah. It's what's familiar. And, your comfort can be, you can have a very comfortable coffin, and can limit you. And so just because something's comfortable doesn't mean it's actually really good for you. It just means it's familiar. So, and the reality is, if the person can function, great. They are able to function. They know they can function. Is it really objectively true that they couldn't function if the space was more physically aligned? And really, you only know when you do it. Like how much bandwidth that's currently being occupied by having to track where things are or knowing where things are inside the mess. What could all of that consciousness bandwidth be devoted to if that space were aligned? Now, they're saying, I'm sure, and they will justify that, well, if it's too organized, then, but you're going yin and yang here. You're going chaos control as a duality, as opposed to what's a harmonious blend. Yeah. And I don't think
subjective. I don't know, maybe I like certain things in a certain place, and my partner will like it a little bit more in their words, organized. But to me, it's but my way is also organized. It's just a different organization.
It's your organized. Yeah, exactly. It's your level of order.
There's also a principle of being well used. For example, there are certain things that I need close to me or available at a moment's notice. And it may not be the most aesthetically pleasing, but that's what has to happen. Otherwise, it's inefficient. It doesn't work. You know?
So this ties in actually a very deep principle, because if we go back to, minimalism and maximalism and the whole, functional and that relationship, things being well used is the name of the game. That is really what it's all about. How are you being well used in the world? How is everything in your home being well used, as opposed to, and Gladys's tea set sitting there out of obligation and it's not being used and I hate it.
Right.
It's gathering dust and it's just something else I have to dust. So, if your desk, everything, first of all, I say when things are being used, it's actually not clutter, in the sense that, if you're working on a project and you have papers around and they're strewn all over, if you're in the middle of using them, I don't consider that clutter, because for me, clutter is things that are not being used, things that are in the wrong place, or things that where there is no proper place to put them. That's my 3 definitions of clutter, or a combination thereof. Now, the thing is, though, if they constantly stay in a disheveled state, even as you're not using them, because you will one day use them, that's a different thing. That's like all of your clothes are like they're all over the floor, because eventually you're going to wear them, as opposed to, I'm not wearing them now, I'm going to put them in the closet because that's where they belong, because I like to have a clear horizontal walking surface upon which I can ambulate. It actually makes more sense, right? Rather than having clothes all over the floor, or all over that chair in the bedroom, which, don't get me started on why is there even a chair in a bedroom anyway, because who's going to use it? Like, you don't sit and look at a bed. So there's other things that happen in design principles that are very, I would say, wrong shui. Of course, in a non-dual sense, of course. I just say that as a bit of a joke. But so I did a training, a course once for, and I've done quite a bit on COVID, on home offices, and I'm starting to create some, I'm going to have some pre-recorded courses on feng shui that people can do, so that, they can focus on, home office, or look at the topic of clutter, or look at, different parts of the home, and just sort of have like these mini chapters that they can tackle piece by piece. And I did one on a home office. And of course, there was somebody in there who was, quite adamant that I functioned very well without, et cetera, et cetera. And, I gave my spiel and I talked about it and the whys and the whats and everything. And I could not be more surprised when a week later he sends me before and after photos. And what he did and what he changed was staggering. And guess what? He could still function. He was functioning very well in that new space. And he wasn't busy defending, the need for that, because he could function. Yes, you can function. You can function with bad posture too, but you won't function as well. So there's the, you don't know until you try it. And there's also the reality, yes, you need to be comfortable. And what will, for a lot of people, be uncomfortable is sterile, linear, non-creative. This is part of the issue of what those people, those creative thinkers, are about. And so they get that by having papers all over the place. Whereas, what if you got yourself a plant with leaves that go in what looks to the human eye as a bit of disorder, but actually has that fractal nature and some good old Fibonacci sequences and all that kind of stuff going on through it. And that's one of the principles of biophilia. The patterns of nature are inherently integrating and balancing.
So how is that a big part of feng shui? Is because again, I don't know. Is there something about having something living in your environment an important part of that thought process? Of that
yeah, absolutely. First of all, you have so you have 5 elements, right? They consider everything in the physical world is made up of one of 5 sort of elements: fire, earth, metal, water, or wood. So you do want to have either symbolic or actual representations, like the actual element itself shown. Now, you don't need to have real fire per se, so you don't need a real fireplace or to set
right.
And Gladys,
maybe a candle or a.
But you can do a candle, but actual lighting, because it does the same thing. It can create warmth and it provides light. That symbolically represents the fire element. So yes, having those things. So wood, wooden flooring, sorry, it's actually dead wood because it's not growing. So living plants. And if you're not good with living plants, to be honest, if you have really nice fake plants, it's good. It works. I have this gorgeous fake orchid and nobody knows it's fake because it's such a great one. And every time I see it, I love it. And I know it's not going to die and turn into that sort of orchid stick graveyard kind of situation that a lot of people have, where they keep this stick, these sticks growing out of a pot because it'll flower again in 11 months. So that though is one way, like something natural, anything that's natural doesn't question itself. Birds don't question themselves. Plants don't question themselves. The sun doesn't doubt whether it's going to shine. The bird sings. The flower blooms. It just does what it does. And I think having those objects around can be a reminder for us to express ourselves with authenticity as well. And there is the science backing. This is one of the roots of biophilic design. There is an abundance of scientific evidence. And there's a fascinating study that I believe it started in the 1980s in hospitals, where they looked at, okay, there's this side of the hospital that's sunnier and has views of nature, and the other side that doesn't. And they did extensive studies working both with the views and also with both images and actual nature in the rooms. And across the board, the people, even if they're having same kind of surgery, same kind of procedures, those with either the views or expressions of nature in the home, in their rooms rather, required half the medication and half the healing time.
Wow. That's amazing. I would
across the board.
I had a question. Well, first of all, I do like wood, just in general, veneers or panels or flooring, just to have that kind of earthy feel around you. But you mentioned that with clutter, especially that if it's functional or if you're using it rather than it's not really clutter. Well, how about, and I kind of feeding this to you, and I think I know, but I just want to hear you explain it. How about if you have artwork, which you don't really use, but it has an aesthetic and a pleasing value, and I guess seeing those plants as a similar thing, it makes you happy and releases whatever endorphins, and that gets you going. But those are just stagnant. But they can be beautiful and good, I guess.
Artwork is one of the most important things to have in your home, to have these pictures that stimulate something inside, either an emotional state or creativity or whatever. And there's all kinds of ways that, using applying like a feng shui lens or seeing it through a feng shui perspective, you can start to see and analyze what the messaging is. In the same way that when you see television or magazine advertising, you might see the obvious, but you don't necessarily see what the subliminal, what the placement is, what the colors are doing, and all of that sort of stuff. The reason the kids grab candy at the checkout line is largely because of the shiny packaging and the color. That's primarily what it is. So that's what stimulates. They don't necessarily know what's inside. They just know, ooh, shiny color, and then they go for it. And this is what we're all like. So where the art becomes stagnant is when the same thing stays in the same place for too long. That starts to become same old. And hedonic adaptation kicks in, which is that process whereby what was once new and exciting becomes same old.
So where's that line? Because, we go for fun just to open houses occasionally on weekends. We'll go to homes of people that maybe they're an older, maybe in their 60s, 70s, and they're thinking about downsizing, and they've been in that house for 40 years, and they're very comfortable with it. And of course, we look at the furniture and the this and that and like, oh, that was really nice in the 70s, but maybe not in the 2020s. But they're perfectly fine with it and comfortable. And so it's hard for me to, I can appreciate if it's a good quality piece, even if it's 50 years old. But where do you draw that line where, oh, well, we've got to change your furniture every 10 years? Because I know my partner would be one to say, let's get a new couch every 10 years. And I'd be like, this one's pretty good. I think this will last for the rest of our lives.
And that's the art, and that's where you can't prescribe the one size fits all. But what you do need and what is for real, and this is where I would say, work smaller first, get flowers on a regular basis, we'll revolve some, if you have your favorite art pieces, in a sense, ideally you have more than fits on the wall and you do rotation. And you keep some stuff in every few months, you might actually just swap a couple of pieces out, or you move them around, or then you have that piece moves into another room and you try it out somewhere else. So that your nervous system gets that new hit and you get to have your familiar favorites, but you get to see it in a new light. So it's not always that piece needs to be on that wall because that's the only place that fits. That then starts to feel like, okay, there is some stagnation. And the fact is that, there is, and this is not judgment, and it's very hard in our culture to hear these, some of these statements as non-judgment when you're, articulating something like this, that couple that where if a lot of that stuff or all of that stuff is the same, then there's a place where they stop growing. And so you grow comfortable, but then again, how adaptable are you? What's changing? What's not changing? So they can be comfortable within their unit and within there. But, it's the same with our clothes. Like, we can all have like that shirt still looks great and everything. But a lot of what brings us the pleasure of those items was, when we first got it, it's still connected to the story of when we first got it and who we were then and how it looked and so on and so forth. And a lot of the time we're trying to relive that old experience.
Right.
And it might still look good in present time. But if you have that old shirt, then maybe you're going to have a new tie with it.
Yeah.
You're going to have a new cologne instead of the same cologne bottle from 40 years ago, or or the same haircut that you had 40 years ago, right? So you still frame things differently. And just because something is still good doesn't mean that's the only reason to keep it. Sometimes you update just because it is actually really worth refreshing something. So there's no hard answer. And this is one of the challenges because people want to have, in our, like Lisa Simpson named in the 90s, right? Our quick fix 1 hour photo, instant oatmeal society, where we want those quick answers, and everything but 1 hour photo still applies nowadays. Now we have instant photos, right? So we want everything to be, very easy and digestible, and you don't have to think about it. And just tell me that it's every 5 years or 10 years or 20 there isn't that. Like, everybody needs to adapt. I think you need to be financially responsible, and you're not just throwing money around, or you're not just sort of buying new things just for the sake of new things or because the feng shui guy told you to. Like, you really need to assess individually what's the case. And I go through this myself, where, we can really like what we have.
Yeah. Just frame it.
And there's a level where it still keeps some threads of connectivity to who we are. And when we present ourselves with something new or we shift something, there is an updating of self. We are all capable of, and we all are evolving constantly. And when your home doesn't keep up in enough places, and again, I'm not just saying just be commercialist, it's all about the outside, et cetera, but it's just, there needs to be some adapting that goes on and some shifts that go on that help you ride that wave of evolution, which is inevitably part of where we as conscious beings are being drawn.
Well, and there's another aspect to that I think is important to think about, and it goes back to the kind of the novelty aspect of our of our beings. We kind of crave it, but it's interesting. One of the great joys I have is when I not just discover something new, but maybe rediscover something old.
Yeah.
And so if you like you said before, just because you you don't necessarily have to get rid of something, but
yes.
My wife, for example, she has a box of like old t-shirts and stuff that maybe that I'll find the box and I'll go through the box and go, oh, there's my football game jersey or something, and it just it's such a fun like rediscovery to find that item and go, oh, now I'm not going to put that on the wall, but it's there, and maybe someday I will, or maybe my kids will. I don't know. But the point is you can have those feelings anew. You can have that relationship renewed,
totally,
just by having it out of sight for a while.
Yes. Or what if you actually literally reframe some of your favorite old art?
Right.
You can see there was a certain style of framing that was popular in the 80s and then in the 90s and then and you reframe your favorite piece and all of a sudden it's given new life to it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing that you can do as well. And sometimes you don't need to reframe it. You just put it in a different part of the room and you've reframed it because the environment is completely different. The light is different and all of that. So I think that this is really, really key, and you will always have some favorites, and that's great. I've got my favorites. I've got it. I get it. And also, sometimes letting go of some of these things is also a way that you start reframing yourself. And again, it's not a hard line and you must and so on. But let's say wedding photos, because this is a big feng shui topic because I deal with it a lot with my clients, right? So when they, it's one of the reasons people come to me is either they're looking for a relationship and, the home environment can really help cultivate that. And they've heard at least that feng shui can help create space for that, or they're having relationship problems. And I've heard feng shui can help with that. So inevitably, couples have photos of perhaps the engagement, definitely the wedding, probably the honeymoon, and then the photos of the couple stop once they've had kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's photos of the father with the kids and the mother with the kids and the parents with the kids, and there's no photo of the parents together without kids.
Yeah.
After that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Because
that's
of
the
course,
new thing.
Their life revolves around the kids. Like, that is true. And, they're a couple, and that's why they had the kids, because they were together and they were a romantic couple. And so how do you create the environment that has that? And so, the not throning the wedding pictures, because this is an interesting thing. Think about it. Like,
so good.
Why do you need to show the wedding pictures if, drum roll please, you're already living together, married?
Right.
So what's the point? And what it ends up doing is you filter your relationship through where you hoped you would be now at the time that you got married.
That is so smart. Having been married for 20 plus years, that is right on. Because, they say the most humble day in a man's life is when, you look at the journal that you meant to write and you compare it with the journal that you actually wrote, and it's the same thing with the marriage, like my marriage is not what I imagined it the day of the marriage. It's much deeper, harder, better, and flat out worse. I mean, it's everything
for worse. It's in the vows.
It's everything plus,
Yeah. So, but that picture perfect, and people make weddings picture perfect. And then you expect when there isn't that picture perfect, even though, like, as I said, and you were saying, like, for better or for worse was actually in the vows on the day that those pictures were taken. You don't want to see that. So, my suggestion is always get a photo of you guys taken within the last 6 months, and whether it's a selfie that you have printed out at the local drugstore or whatever, and you have that, you place that near or within the same arrangement as the wedding photos. All of a sudden, the arrangement is not in the past. There is a whole thread of connectivity into the present moment, and that is one pit stop along the trajectory of your relationship into the present and beyond. And so it changes everything completely.
I think the things you're bringing up are so important, and people just, I know people are going to listen to this and reflect and maybe call you up and say, hey, I need some a private lesson.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I also want to bring up, because I got some really fabulous feedback recently when I was demoing some of this stuff, is, it can bring up emotional stuff. And however you feel about that, and however you feel about yourself, like waking up to, things aren't going as well, or, I have let things slide, or what. Okay, you might have that emotional reaction, and let yourself have that emotional reaction. Don't try to cover that up, or, I'm just going to get rid of that right. Don't rush into it. If you let yourself feel it, it's like that water that meets that edge of the bank and then decides, okay, which way am I going to go? Then you can actually make a more aligned choice. So I'm not saying get rid of everything. I'm not saying, but it's just what can we start to do?
Be more aware
a little bit differently, and from a more, aware perspective. So, our culture does teach us some pretty stupid things. And one of the dumb things that people say is, it'll be the happiest day of your life.
Yeah.
What the heck? So essentially what they're
after that,
your life is going downhill from now is literally what they are saying.
Yeah.
That is completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And people don't question that.
Nope.
Yeah.
Why should it be? It is one of the happiest days of your life. It is an important day of your life. It is a memorable day of your life.
And the objects, and everything we do, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a promise. It is something that it's about the future. That's what a marriage is about. A marriage is about the future. It's not about the moment. That's just celebrating the future.
Well, the wedding, actually, the wedding is about the moment, or the wedding's about the future. And it's it's sowing the seeds for that. But then there's the growth. That's actually the marriage is actually the expression and the experience of that through the years, right? So the marriage grows and evolves and so on, and the relationship and that bond. And so how that expresses. And so there will be the turns in the river and the yin and the yang and the good and the bad and all of that. for better or for worse. Notice again, those are the relative words, right? Not bad and good.
Yeah.
Better or worse. So
That's
it's very
good.
yin and yang in that sense, right? It's not absolutes. But just how do you keep your relationship in present time? Like another one, just to go back to the same topic. Why would you have photos of your kids in your bedroom?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have them, they're in
Right.
your house. You're not going to look at them in the bedroom because, you're sleeping there. And it's not going to exactly encourage you if you have them or even photos of your parents in your bedroom. Doesn't really encourage a romantic relationship, right? And this is part of, again, the cooling down. That's like something that creates friction in the environment towards a certain expression because it's not consistent with the mindset of how it is that you would express. So when you're a newly married couple, you didn't have pictures of kids in there. And ideally, I hope you didn't have pictures of your parents in the bedroom. And I've gone into places where, I just got divorced. And it's like, that large photo of your mother that's looking towards the bed on the wall.
It's not helping.
He might have left your mother and not you. So there is all of these things where we subconsciously put something somewhere. We don't consciously do it, but just because you didn't think about it, this is again what we were saying about science before. Just because you didn't intend it or you didn't believe it doesn't mean it's not impactful. Doesn't mean it's not true.
Okay.
You can be ignorant of the fact that you're standing in the middle of the road and a car is racing towards you.
Right.
Your knowledge of the car, your lack of knowledge of the car coming towards you doesn't mean it's not coming towards you and it's not going to impact you.
Exactly.
And the same thing around the impact of what you see and how that makes you feel. And I'll just bring up a very clear societal, framework for this. Because we brought up sports events in Super Bowl advertising, right? You know how much money they spend on those commercials?
Oh, yeah, it's like
million.
$500,000 for 30 or $1 million for 30 seconds or something.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount per second that they're paying, and plus production costs, and they're paying that money simply because they know they have access to more brains through eyeballs,
right?
And they would not be spending all this money on both the airtime and the production if commercials didn't work, if they didn't create some kind of connection between your thoughts and a product, and ideally sculpt your consciousness towards becoming a consumer of that product.
Right.
So how long are these commercials?
15 to 20 seconds. 30 seconds.
15 to 30 seconds. Okay, and they're willing to spend that much money on that. All right, so tell me the value and the cost of the things that you look at for weeks, months, or years.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
So anytime somebody's a skeptic, I was like, well, let's talk business here. Yeah. Because it is not simply because you are watching television that you are programmable.
Yep.
So everything you look at, read, and perceive programs your mindset and creates associations.
Okay, so that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but that because I want to talk about two more things myself, and whatever Elias wants to,
whatever in my rants and my sort of fish. we all need feng shui.
You go in different routes, and then I'm like, oh wait, that, and then like, no.
I know it's like
exactly.
Speaking of finding the meandering path or whatever the word.
Meandering,
yeah. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of the more maybe controversial aspect of feng shui,
sure.
and then I also want to ask you just maybe a couple of simple tips or ideas that somebody can actively do today if they're listening to this.
Perfect.
So what is a lot of people think of maybe a more superstitious version of feng shui. You put an object in a certain place and you'll have good luck or you have great fortune, great relationships, as you mentioned before. So talk a little bit about that, the relationship, what are your thoughts on that aspect of feng shui?
Yeah. So again, it's a pretty complex topic, like a lot of it is, and there's the simple side of it, and then there's the deeper elements to it. So I just named that, looking at something for a short period of time seems to impact your consciousness. So if there are certain symbols that in Feng Shui have been determined to be sort of have a subtextual kind of imprinting capability on your mindset, then it follows that somehow that starts to program you in a certain way to believe, think, feel, behave in a certain way. So, if you think about, okay, in wealth, you're often going to see, go into any Chinese restaurant, you're going to see a waterfall somewhere, right? Or you're going to see a fish tank. You're going to see all kinds of different things, right? Now, it's all about location for sure. So there is that element of Feng Shui, and that's a bit complex to get into right now. But if we think about, a waterfall, I wouldn't put it everywhere just because Feng Shui says so. But, what it's talking about is that there's this abundance of energy, of life nurturing water. It's one of the things that we need to survive. And here we have an abundance of it, and it's just coming our way. That messaging is inherent in that form. And so again, whether we believe it or not, it seems to communicate that. And Feng Shui means wind and water, which, we can then translate as air and water. And so those are the two forms of energy that we need in physical form that we need to survive, right? We need air, we need water. And if you have those, that's a blessing. And so when you have more water than you need, and you can actually keep water and collect water, that's symbolic of collecting wealth. Like you've accumulated a supply that's more than you actually need just in the moment. So you have those reserves. So, yeah, isn't it? It's a bit bizarre, isn't it? It's like, okay, so why does this, so why should that programming, why should it work if I don't even believe it? Yeah, there's a certain mystery to it. And, so to bring up a great skeptic story, which is one of my favorites, a friend of mine, a British friend of mine who's an electronic music DJ, said to me one day, we were having a chat, and he's like, now, Mark, I don't believe in Feng Shui or any of that rubbish. Yes. And I was like, yeah, I know. But he said, somebody got me one of them little Japanese wavy cats. The ones that you see in a lot of Asian restaurants, little paws up. Yeah. And that's what he called it, the wavy cat. And, he said, so I did what my friend gave it to me as a gift, did what he said, put it opposite the door. Starting the next day, one booking after another starts coming in. Every day, a new booking. Completely booked for the next 3 months.
Wow.
Didn't know what was going on. I've never been this busy. He says, then I was moving, packed it up. All the new bookings stopped coming in. No cancellations from the old ones, but nothing new started coming in.
Wow.
So interesting scientific thing, right? And again, he didn't believe it. He had no attachment to it.
Right.
So then he's like, okay, wait a second. So let's check this out. So he said, gets to the new place. He says, first thing I do, bung up a shelf, as the British love to say, bung up a shelf opposite the door, put the cat there, and new bookings start flowing in. So he says, so I don't believe in Feng Shui, but that cat's on that shelf with 3 packs of batteries behind it. And if anybody goes near that thing to touch it, I'm going to break their hands.
Right?
And so I told some mutual friends this story, and they're like, well, I'm going to get that cat. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I get a message from one of the guys. I'm booked up for the next 3 months as well. He's like, what is going on here?
Wow.
So I looked at it because, my whole approach to Feng Shui, I like to say it's contemporary Feng Shui. So I wanted to get off that East-West duality.
Uh-huh.
I consult in Japan, and I came up with a term when in 2003, I was invited to go present some seminars in Japan. And I said, people were starting to use the term Western Feng Shui. And I was like, well, I cannot go to Asia and talk about Western Feng Shui because that's just rude. It's just like completely disrespectful. So I just kind of, parsed out like, what's the essential element here? And the essential element is, here we are in the 21st century, contemporary Feng Shui. And how we express that in Asian countries is going to be different according to their culture and to each person's home and to where they are now in their life is contemporary, like present time expression. So I was really curious because this maneki neko, as the Japanese call it, like a beckoning cat, or the wavy cat, as my friend called it. I was like, what is the deal with this thing, right? So I looked at it and analyzed it. And, there's the intention of the whole thing that it has the word either fortune or luck or something on it. And it's the theme of it is that it's welcoming. And if you get one that's moving, it's actually something that's moving when you enter your home. There's a quality of movement which draws your eye, which draws your attention, which you could say then draws consciousness, draws energy, draws flow towards something. Like if you see any movement, your eye's going to go there. In general. This is why if you sit, this is another feng shui thing. If you sit with your desk facing the window, you know, your productivity can go out the window because anytime a bird flies by or something goes by, your eye is going to go to it and you're going to be distracted.
Or rabbits jump over each other.
Right. Exactly.
Earlier.
Yeah. Right. So I was thinking, I was like, oh, I wonder if his desk is facing the window. So I started looking at this. I was like, well, you know, so that thing works. And it doesn't mean that that's the only thing you need to have. So what there is there's the theme of welcoming. There's the fact that there's movement in a static environment. This is one of the things that sort of what you brought up earlier, Elias, about, you know, art and being stagnant. You know, everything in our home is stagnant. Which is why when we create something that has movement, that has that irregularity, and that's one of the principles of biophilia, non-rhythmic sound is one of them. So if you think about the gurgling of a water fountain or wind chimes that happen to move, you know, because some wind came through the window and stimulated them. So there's something that's not predictable, that's not in a fixed rhythm. There's something that's inherently appealing to us physiologically and on a deep level to that. And so that, you know, the fact that you walk indoors from the outside world and, oh, there's something that's moving, boom, your eye goes there. At where your eye goes, right, attention goes, intention goes, and so on. So I started using this cat, you know, and then other moving things as well. But I you know, occasionally if I have a client who has it, I'll say, okay, let's try it here. And, you know, sure enough, this client who was trying to sell her business for 2 years, you know, sold it 2 weeks after we put the cat. I mean, it was just, it's staggering. So I can't fully explain.
And you can buy those beckoning cats at www.markainley. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Right? No, I'm not selling them. And I would love to, like, again, I personally don't like it. And I have also observed, wow, you know, these restaurants that have a lot of those, or these places are doing pretty well, you know, compared to their neighbors, or even at a music festival, whereas like, you know, here's a food truck, and the food truck that had one next to the cash register and at the back next to the cooking trailer, like that place had longer lineups than anywhere else. I was like, what is going on here? So there's stuff that I can't fully get. But if you also do things with intention, there's that also. Yeah, but the reality is there's messaging that's subliminal, that's beyond our comprehension, that's infused inside certain shapes and certain objects, certain elements, like I was talking about water or fire or any of these things, that we don't need to know or understand or even believe for it to do something.
Well,
and it doesn't mean, sorry, just one key point. It doesn't mean that if you just put that there, then yay, everything's working, I'm going to be original. It's not that, and you can't predict. One of the things with this guy was he was expecting nothing.
Yeah.
And that is one of the key things as well. And one of the things that will get in your way with feng shui. If you're you know, having intention is one thing, but, you know, let it go and live your life and just, you know, go with the flow and start to see what happens. So requiring things to show up in the way that you predict them is the straight line mode of flowing through life, and that doesn't happen. So that meandering pathway and that adaptability of what's happening is really the way things do flow to you in life. Sorry for that interruption.
No, that's perfect because it absolutely contradicted what I was about to say, and I love it.
And that's the flow, yeah. So you know, those wavy cat, that's just an example, right? Now there's other things where you can imagine, you know, one of the feng shui sort of theories is, you know, if you look, there's a grid with how they overlay, you know, certain colors and certain kinds of objects in certain areas of the home in relation. You know, historically was done with compass directions. Now, you know, myself and, you know, how I practice it and a lot of others is based on where your door is. You know, like put something red, for example, and this is one of the suggestions you can try. Red or something in the reddish tone on the far wall opposite the door when you're looking in, like center of the wall. And if you imagine, that's like the sun that's rising. So it's like the sun on the horizon. Right, and your eye goes towards the light. Go towards the light, and you know, so just imagine. But there's that warmth, and there's that rising energy, and that there's something that just speaks to, in a sense, our biological, you know, our instinctual, you know, following the light. and seeing the light. So having that red there, it draws you into the home, because every time you see the color red, your heart rate accelerates just a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Just that there's just that flash. So having that there in the position where it would be the sun on the horizon, there's something to that. So that's one little technique that you can try. I think every room needs a little splash of red, because and ideally that opposite of the door place. And it doesn't mean this is where people want to go a whole hog. I have to paint the wall red and get red curtains and get red furniture. No. You can see the red because of everything around it that's not red.
Right.
If you look at your hand right now, you can see your hand simply because there's all this stuff around your hand that's not your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the thing with the clutter and the papers and the books and having your things, when you have air that can actually circulate and go around it, that's that oxygen and that fresh air and a breath of fresh air and nourishment and, that alive energy, the force that I like to say. When people talk about chi, the Chinese word for energy that's in this, I would say, Star Wars fans would call it the force. This energy that permeates. If you listen to what Obi-Wan Kenobi said about this, this energy that permeates and moves through everything, it's pretty much, that's what George Lucas was talking about. So if the air doesn't touch it, if everything's jammed in so tightly, there's a level where it has stagnation. So bookshelves, cabinets, closets, if you can manage 70% full, seems to be a little formula that seems to work. Having objects in between stacks, some stacks horizontally and some vertically, just to sort of change things up. That's something that can work as well. I think it's just that updating the relationship and not packing everything in so densely, where something that's functional can also be aesthetic. And that ties in a little bit, I think, Elias, of what you were speaking to before, right? Like, they don't need to be dual. I think you can have an office that is perfectly functional and is aesthetic. And I think that a lot of, the mad professor kind of things where, things go completely, there's the, Einstein's desk, that famous photo of
right.
It, right? It's great, and he did what he did, and I'm not going to complain about what he did. I am also kind of curious. I was like, wow, I wonder if he had a plant over there and the desk was tidy, what would it be like? And that client of mine who, the person who attended that seminar, who then, made the change despite his defense of that desk and did put a plant there and did make it a bit more appealing. There was a positive shift in how he was able to work.
Yeah.
So I think, a plant somewhere. And again, it doesn't mean, giant, 6 foot tall, sort of, or huge things, but buy yourself flowers every week. I think it's something that's great because it changes the colors there. It's fresh. You're bringing in nature. There's also water in there. There's you're creating color. There's non-linear that you're welcoming into the space. So there's all kinds of abundance and beauty and wealth that comes from that experience of just having fresh flowers.
That's wonderful. Elias, do you have anything before we?
No, I think that's great to hear. Just kind of wrapping up on this great advice. It's a really fun conversation.
And actually, if I can use the term, because I really appreciate that you said that. I heard from someone recently a fabulous insight that I've started incorporating, and they said insight, not advice.
Yeah.
And when you have the insight, nobody needs to tell you what to do. You really do get to choose. And that's what I'm trying to do and what I hope I'm doing here. And, and again, in our culture, we tend to use the word, right? Here's an expert and they're telling me something. So that's advice. And so we tend to look at it that way. And what I'd really like to be able to do is sort of encourage, hopefully I can do that and also encourage others. If we're able to just provide insight, people can then get to choose if they want to do something or not, or what's going to be best for them. So, you don't have to do any of this stuff. There's this guy on the radio who's, on this podcast who's telling you all this stuff. Yeah. So what, right? Well, you get to listen. If it resonates, if there's some insight, if it starts to make sense for you, then you get to assess, okay, am I going to try this or not?
Maybe if you like it, that insight can become advice.
That's it. But you start advising yourself based on the insight.
That's right.
Right. And based on all of that. And that's what I try to do is that, whenever anybody asks me, what color should I paint my room? The first thing I do is say, tell me 3 colors that you like. And if their colors would be, again, I use this expression as a joke. If all 3 colors were like wrong shui, that gives me some interesting information.
Yeah.
because I'd say, okay, there might be some unintended consequences to some of the choices you're making, and here's what they are. Instead of me just imposing a suggestion and they follow it, but then, that insight never gets there because they didn't actually learn if you had a certain inclination.
Yeah.
Which does bring me back to with your bedroom. If you want to keep things warm in the bedroom, you like to feel warm in bed, you want to have a warm relationship, maybe the warm colors would help as opposed to, cool colors.
There you go. Yep.
It's just, isn't that just common sense?
And
yet we don't seem to apply that. And then in design, everybody says, oh, well, masculine colors, they tend to, masculine bedding tends to be black, blue, gray kind of color. And it's like, and we're talking about, right, how emotionally unavailable people are, lacking warmth, a little bit hard edged. It's like, really?
Maybe those should be masculine colors.
Reinforce that.
Exactly. But this is what will happen. Anything that's out of alignment in our culture will reinforce itself. And what gets expressed in that way. An Ayurvedic practitioner told me once, when you're out of alignment, you are naturally going to crave what will take you further out of alignment. And when you are aligned, you will crave what will continue to deepen that alignment. And so this is the issue. And this is where, this can be misinterpreted, but where I'll say, if you just trust your intuition, is it really your intuition, right? Is it just your sense of what's comfortable because it's familiar, but that's actually expressing a subconscious blockage? That's where feng shui practitioners can come in and they can look at a space with that broader non-personal perspective where, it's not my stuff, and I can start to see the patternings and I see the subliminal messaging, and I can say, you're saying you want a partner, but everything I see, here's this image of a single woman over here, and here's that single cushion over there, and here's that single item over there, and you start seeing single all over the place that the space is communicating and flashing to you, then how are you going to be not single if you're not creating that? And then you have those cool colors, so then you have to work that much harder to warm things up in the bedroom. So not to mention that blue gets you can end up feeling blue if you have too much blue.
Right.
It's just kind of common sense as well. And I'm not saying then, and people have tried to do this, don't have blue then, because no, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, what's the balance?
It's that yin yang thing again. It's you can't have, it's impossible to be happy all the time. Otherwise you're insane.
That's it.
Things are
So
defined
of course
by
you
their
need blue.
relationship to something else.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
I want to ask you, because I know that I hope as people listen, I know people are going to have a lot of questions and I know this is, by the way, I also wanted to mention, I appreciated this conversation because, not only to make me think about my relationship with the objects in my house and the things around me, but in a real way, it changed my relationship with you. Like I've always thought of you as the piano, the piano files guy and the music guy and the guy to go to some of those expertise. But talking to you about this, deepens and enhances that relationship. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing this with me.
Thank you. And I think then also as you then deepen your relationship with your environment, you're deepening your relationship with yourself because you're opening yourself to the conversation of what is it that I value and how do I see myself and where am I wanting to go and what's going to help me get there?
Yeah.
What are the signposts that I'm looking to, what artwork, do I put and what do I look at that is like that map that takes me, the signposts that I see on my journey. So, there is so much to this and so much of this that does resonate to the music because all of the great performances we've been listening to, these have been people who had their clear sense of themselves and what they were expressing, and they did it in their individual way. And, each person's home should ideally look different from everybody else's, not just like what's in a magazine, not just what does the feng shui book tell me, the art of it is really, just like, how are you guys going to play the Chopin Nocturne in your way that is both a service to Chopin and to music and also an expression of your own perspective?
Right.
Then how do the four walls of your house become a home in a way that the home that welcomes you back home and then welcomes anybody who comes into your home who wants your home, not like the HGTV home. No offense to no offense to them, but it's just not just what's necessarily is designer.
Right. And it's not yours. It's not your life.
Well, that's it. And that's why, when people ask me, well, what color should I do my bedroom? I don't live there, so I want to hear, first what you want. And then let's have a conversation and find out, okay, given what you've told me, given what you want, what's going to work.
So how can people get in touch with you if they want to consult with you or if they want to have some questions? What's the best way for people to get information?
So my website is senseofspace.com. It is about to undergo a major renovation. So there's a couple of little bugs in there. Unfortunately, right now it is being re-feng shuied. So you can reach me at mark@senseofspace.com. And Instagram is actually a really great place to find me. Okay. So sense of space with underscores between each word, sense_of_space on Instagram. I do posts, most days of the week with little bits of advice and inspiration. Advice, there we go. Insight that hopefully leads to advice. But some images, and occasionally, on Fridays, I tend to use do a funny Friday kind of, a bit of a joke kind of thing that actually leads to a little, here's the moral of the story kind of thing. And Instagram's kind of one of the best places to sort of get some regular updates. Facebook, we all know what social media has been like, and their algorithm has just cut my, 1,000 people on the page to about 3 or 4 people getting the notifications.
Wow.
So yeah, it's
Instagram, and that makes sense. I mean, being
Instagram's better,
photocentric.
Yeah, exactly. And I tend to max out the word, I'm quite generous with the information that I share, and I tend to max out, I have to shorten this because I'm past the word, the character count. And, but it's quite fun. And, the important thing to recognize for anybody, whether you think it's right shui or wrong shui or whatever it is, you want your home to speak to you. And there's the you who's already you who it's speaking to now, because that's who you are now, and it's the expression of yourself. Who you are more deeply, I think, can be drawn out by some new choices. And I think that some of those suggestions and insights on the page can really help you tap into that. And it's still cookie cutter, because anything that's in the mainstream or whatever, or that I'm going to have to do there, has to be generalized, because each person is different and I can only speak in generalities. Mm-hmm. When you get something that's really individual, it is phenomenal what starts to happen. And it's been, I've been in thousands of homes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing. I've probably been in more Japanese homes than the average Japanese person, because culturally they don't invite people to homes. And so, it's an honor, and it's a really fascinating way to sort of see how, everybody wants to live a fulfilling life.
Right.
And your home can be the map, in a sense, that then helps you start to navigate the territory outside of your 4 walls in a different way with some more flow, so that when those inevitable obstacles show up, they become actually just part of the way. They're rerouting opportunities. And if you just want to yell plot twist because something different happened, and then start to roll with what it is that's shown up in your life, then life can be more interesting.
And I don't want to go down another path, but what you just said just sparked something that I think is really important, when that is, so a lot of times, we look forward to things. We look forward to a vacation. We look forward to we look forward, and we have like this image in our mind of what that will be like and everything. Yeah. But those vacations, they only last so long. They only are only short, they're only short segments of this kind of hits of adrenaline of happiness. Yep. You know what I mean? It's not sustainable in a way. And so if you can get the small things in your life right, if you can get your room right, if you can get your schedule first thing in the morning right, those things that you do every single day, I mean, if you can get those little things right, it will pay huge dividends. Absolutely. And by right, it's aligned, right? And it's aligned, there's that lack of, there's that smoothness and that integrity of who you are and how the space expresses, so that it's basically that inside and outside does become one. Yeah. And that's that is the magic. And that's where, you do then get those little
delights. And, I have to say, I was very fortunate that during COVID, I could do a lot of work. I've done online consultations for years, and I could continue that. And I never get bored at home.
That's awesome.
Like my home is set up in a way where like I can absolutely enjoy it. There's always something for me to do. I can always enjoy it. And of course, I still need the hits and, to go outside and to get fresh air and have unexpected experiences and all of that. But, I was fortunate in that, being at home, and I realized not everybody has that luxury for many, many reasons. And it's not to, to dismiss any of those realities. But, this was something that I was very fortunate that, how my space welcomes me and reflects me, and therefore affects me in an continually evolving way. And the way I'm still updating, I'm still doing that now. And post-COVID, now it's not fully post-COVID, but, 18 months on and things are changing. I am feeling the need to make some shifts. And that is part of it because, we do change and the space does need to reflect that. So, I am very fortunate. And my wish for everybody is that they would feel at home.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great place to end. Mark, thank you for being on the show again.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to speak with you both. And thank you for giving me my soapbox to shake my fist and say, please live your lives and have your beautiful home.
It's great insight, Mark. It's great insight.
Yeah.
So,
really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, and Elias, again, thank you for co-hosting with me. I really appreciate your input, and this has been a great conversation.
Big learning experience. Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So you've been talking to Mark Ainley. You can reach him at mark@senseofspace.com. Also senseofspace _sense_of_space on Instagram. Check them out there. There'll be links in the show notes. And my name is Mike Levitt, and you're listening to And If Love Remains.